Hello. So earlier tonight, I came across a story from Southwark in London where a guy is doing a sort of walk to raise awareness of men's mental health issues, and that kind of got me. I think I'll try and get it up, the specific name of this campaign, this endeavour. If you live in London, do consider supporting him if you can. Um, Yeah, proper bloke to walk 50 miles in a day for men's mental health awareness. It's from the Southwark News. I'll put a link in the video. And his name is, it says a Bermondsey man will walk 50 miles in one day to battle the stigma surrounding men's mental health, writes Simon Frotzel. Lifelong SE16 resident Scott Johnson started the Proper Blokes Club in September 2020 as a way to get men talking about mental health through walking. Um, so check that out. Fair play to this guy. It's definitely a good endeavor and an important thing. It's no mystery that suicide is the leading cause of death for men, I think, between the ages of 20 and 45 in this country. Um, I don't know how COVID has affected that because more men die from COVID than women. So I don't know if that's now what the sort of ratio is, but it's it's clear that that is a serious problem. Mental health has been more discussed, I think, in recent years, particularly with the Cambridges and the Sussexes of the royal family. I give them all credit for that. Whatever else you think about the recent drama, I do give them credit for raising awareness and conversation about these things. And there's others as well. The boxer Tyson Fury. There's other public figures, that have raised awareness of this. Um, so this is my little slot, my take on it. Um, we talk a lot about mental health stigma, but we need to actually break that down a little bit. What do we mean by stigma? Um, for me personally, I've had some issues. I've had clinical depression, periodic bouts of clinical depression. Um, in terms of other areas, I have sometimes struggled with, I guess you would call it sensory overload. What I mean by that is sometimes I do find the things a little bit overwhelming and I need to slow down a bit. I do find myself getting quite angry about injustice, sometimes to the point where it's distracting. And I think this channel is a great outlet to spread awareness of things, but if I'm being absolutely honest, sometimes I do that certain things dominate my mind perhaps more than they should. And anxiety, I do get periodic bouts of anxiety, but it's not severe. Um, I have a friend who has suffered severe anxiety to the point where he could barely leave his home. So I've never had it that bad, but I have had that feeling of the thing about anxiety, it's different from fear. Fear is more kind of palpable and direct. So, for example, if you think there's an intruder in your house or, there's an imminent attack from a wild animal, something like that, that's fear. And it's a very strong emotion. Anxiety is more gradual, it's more ongoing. Um, Usually it's in the context of no immediate danger or threat. It's just a sort of unease. It's something isn't right and it's troubling you and it's yeah, it's a very unpleasant thing. I would much rather take anger than anxiety because at least with anger you can utilize it, you can use it. With anxiety, it's a lot harder to do that. Now, there's one aspect of this I really, really want to underline, and it's this. When we talk about depression, um, I think actually society is a lot more sympathetic, in part because we recognize that it's quite common, and it is. you know. But I think the stigma comes from treating people like they're helpless if they're depressed. This is sort of something I can relate to a little bit. Um, so I've had certain job endeavors that I've been interested in, and during the application process, they might want to look at your medical history, and I would need to disclose, or I don't have to, but I would disclose, for example, that I had clinical depression and I got treatment for that. Now, it's a double-edged sword because if you don't disclose that, they can find out anyway. Um, but if you do, I think the stigma comes from thinking, well, oh, this person's depressed, so they must be unstable. That's something that really bothers me. And there's actually a high-profile example of this, which is the case of an American politician, Thomas Eagleton. Now, he was on the vice presidential ticket of George McGovern in 1972, and he was dropped at the last minute or pretty late in the campaign because it had been disclosed that he'd had psychiatric help. Now, we're talking almost 50 years ago now, so maybe that context has to be understood. Today, if a politician said they'd been through depression, I think it wouldn't be quite as damaging. And I don't think it should be. I mean, we have a very famous politician who suffered clinical depression. I'm talking, of course, about Winston Churchill. And to use an American context, President Franklin Pierce uh, almost certainly had clinical depression. An even more famous example, Abraham Lincoln. Now, if Lincoln and Churchill went through depression, surely that shows that you could still achieve great things, be a great person, whilst having this situation. So I really don't like the way that depression is perceived as not necessarily a weakness. I don't think it's perceived as a weakness. But people seem to think if someone's been depressed, then oh, we need to be super careful. They're a very unstable person. But it's not that. It's just that there may be certain points in your life. I mean, in my case, it was late 2015, and just everything was going wrong for me at that time. Our family dog had died, and that was a big blow. He'd been with us for a long time. My girlfriend left me. It was amicable, it wasn't some fiery row. It was just circumstance, but that hurt. That got to me. My bike was stolen. Now, all of these things were happening about the same time, and I started getting pretty depressed. So by early 2016, I realized it was quite a serious problem, and so I sought help. I do think for men it is definitely, I can't speak for all men, but for me, and I think a lot of other guys, sort of making the step of making an appointment at your local GP to get diagnosed. It's not easy. I do think and I want to be careful how I say this because I know that medical people have absolutely been on the front line of this pandemic and I've huge respect for them. However, in a more general observation, I do think sometimes there's the clinical side of treating people, which is obviously very important. There's also how you approach it. I think some people in the medical world are a little bit standoffish and um, not approachable, and that doesn't entirely help people coming forward. I've come across doctors who are quite they helped me, but they were not exactly approachable, quite cranky. And, I tried to be sort of understanding. Well, they're in a very demanding job. They've probably had a very long shift. But that sort of thing could be why maybe some people are reluctant to come forward. And it's something that within the medical world, maybe they need to consider a little bit more, because there is a connection here with people not coming forward. But then, is it just pride or is there other reasons? Um, but please don't take that as a kind of criticism of everyone in the medical world. I mean, my mother was a nurse for 40 years. By definition, someone who's a nurse or a doctor is going to be a caring person. But, you can be caring whilst also not entirely having the best people skills in terms of being approachable. I think that's important. Um, but, it just bugs me that people sort of think, well, depression is something unusual or it's even low. You take 10 people, any people, probably the chances are at least one of them, probably two or three, will have been diagnosed with clinical depression. There's probably a lot of people that have had clinical depression, but because they didn't get help, they weren't formally diagnosed with it. Depression, of course, is not just feeling bad. Everyone has stressful days. It's deeper than that. It's because the thing, it is debilitating at the time. It can really disrupt your life. But that doesn't mean that just because someone's been through it, they're suddenly helpless, they can't do anything. And it's something I think that the jobs market, maybe that's an area that we need to still improve on because, the idea that of course it's a cycle because if you get rejected from a job because you want like clinical depression, then it's likely to make you depressed again because you'll think, well, this is a cycle. So I think that needs to be understood or at least considered. Um, I mean, in my case, I was in quite a bad way at the time, and people were very sympathetic, I have to say. A lot of friends, even acquaintances, they reached out, they asked how I was, and I was a little overwhelmed by that. I was grateful. Obviously it was very nice to see that people cared, but it was also a little bit overwhelming because then you're the center of attention, and it's, you know, you sort of end up feeling a little embarrassed, not by the depression, but by the attention. So I would respectfully say, if you have a friend or a relative that's going through depression, don't make a big deal about it. Just maybe offer that you're there for them. But don't make them feel like a charity case. That's, and that's not criticism. People mean well. It's just that it's important to get the balance right. Otherwise, you'll overwhelm people and they'll feel, it won't necessarily make them feel better to feel like people are sort of seeing them as super vulnerable or super fragile because they're not. I mean, it's not anyone can go through this. I mean, look at Tyson Fury. He's in a dangerous, violent, tough sport. He went through it. I haven't always liked Tyson Fury's persona, but I do give him huge credit for doing that, particularly in a sport like boxing, for being upfront about it. Huge credit. Um, and I think, it's regarding men and mental health, I think it's something that is definitely probably an issue in very masculine worlds like combat sports, the armed forces, the police, fire brigade, um, other contact sports, rugby. Anything that is physically or mentally tough, there will be a certain self expectation as well as peer expectation to kind of be tough. Now, I want to be clear here. I think the armed forces have come a very long way from what I've seen. And I think other areas have other professions have come a long way, so things are probably better than they used to be. That's definitely something that is welcome. But this idea that if someone's had depression, then oh, that's it, and let's just treat them like a charity case, or it's not helpful. I think, in my experience, what I needed was a little bit of slowing down in myself because I was just overwhelmed with not work. That wasn't. I wasn't working at the time. It was like a sensory overload. Um, this is where things like this might sound sort of trivial, but something as simple as tidying your room and tidying up a little bit, that can actually be good for mental health because it feels like you're sorting things out. It might be mundane, it might be, something you do often, but simply tidying up, I always find it kind of therapeutic. That's just me. Maybe other people would have something else. But I really think that the best way to approach this is to recognize it's real, recognize that there is a problem with depression. And that's why, I don't want to weigh too much on this, but with the Meghan and Harry interview, I won't totally dismiss Meghan Markle's claims on depression. Who am I to second guess that? Uh, I don't entirely trust her in everything, but I'm not going to second guess that on the grounds that absolutely anyone could go through it. That's so. Anyway, I'm going to round this up soon, but it's also about just being comfortable with yourself and just taking it easy. Actually, the pandemic and the lockdown hasn't been all bad. I think it has been a good opportunity to read and write more in my case. I mean, we're still more or less in lockdown, so if you're watching this, maybe you're feeling very unhappy with your life. Um, we're at a point where, a lot of places are closed still. So it's kind of a bit of, in that sense, it's a bit of breathing space from the world. I know that's a strange way to look at it, but I think the pandemic's really slowed down the world in a sense. Now that's bad for business, obviously. And if you're a business owner, that will probably be a factor that has contributed to depression. I'm not, undermining that, but for other people, it might be an opportunity to just kind of tidy up your life a little bit. Literally, tidy your room. Jordan Peterson said that that's a good way to get control. Just start with the very basics. I mean, for me, I do feel a little bit overwhelmed sometimes, and yet I don't see myself as erratic or you know highly strung or anything like that. I just think that people need to. It goes without saying, if you respect yourself, then you'll be decent to other people anyway. If you're miserable in yourself, chances are you'll be unpleasant to other people. So I think it's very, very important to respect yourself. Try to think of anything else that might be important to say. Yeah, just don't. Stigma for me, I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. We talk about mental health stigma. I think the only stigma, although it's an important one, is treating people, particularly with the issue of depression, like they are super fragile or super vulnerable. Depression isn't, it's a real thing and it can be very debilitating. That's true, but at the same time, it doesn't mean the person is suddenly incapable of doing anything. And they themselves, at least in my case, speaking for myself, I don't want to feel like people are kind of thinking I'm helpless. Because I'm not. I could do a lot of things, and it's just a case of taking it easy. In terms of what other people think, I think it's, if we worry about what others think, it's just too much energy. Really is. So for a long time now, I haven't bothered. In that sense, I'm quite confident, and that's something I'm proud of or grateful for. Because my goodness, if I had a major problem with confidence, um, I think it would be very difficult. For me, my confidence levels are quite high. I'm not saying 100%. I don't think there's many. I think the only people who have 100% confidence are probably narcissists. Most people probably are somewhere around upper middle, whereby they're relatively confident, but they'll have periodic anxiety or whatever. But if you have someone, I mean, I have a good friend and he does suffer anxiety. I just try to talk to him normally. Um, I try to, give him credit, boost him on things that he's good at, and just without overwhelming him. I just try to do that. That's all. Let me know your thoughts and if you've been through anything. But sometimes overt sympathy, although it has good intention, can actually be counterproductive because you can end up making the person feel like there's some, like, it stands them out. So actually, the way to approach a friend or a relative with depression is not like really, really putting a focus on them. Like, oh, I'm here for you. Everything will be fine. Don't worry. It has good intentions, but it can be overwhelming. It's better to be a little bit subtle about it. And I know it's not easy, but that's the best way to do it. Just don't overwhelm the person. Just let them know that you are there for them, and you know you can listen to their concerns, share your thoughts, whatever. But dialogue is very important, and I would say to any guy watching this, anyone, women as well, but because men are more closed about it, talk to someone, even if it's maybe you don't have many friends and you're not close to your family, so talk to a stranger. The Samaritans are great as a charity. Like every charity, they struggle with funding, but that I've used them a few times and I find that they're a very useful outlet. They can't solve your problems, but simply having someone listening is a very important thing. Um, so go easy on yourself and just that's the best way forward. Um, right, I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.